Welcome to Relationships Q&A with Alan Robarge. I'm a psychotherapist and a relationship coach. Thanks for joining me. If you're looking for practical coaching conversations about real relationships, then you're in the right place. I take questions from members of our online community called Improve Your Relationships. And for the next half hour, let's brainstorm. Let's look at these questions from different angles, exploring our possibilities. We're not looking for one right answer. We're looking at what we can learn. The goal is to inspire you and get you thinking about your relationships. All our questions together point towards one universal question. We're all trying to figure out the same thing. How do relationships work? It is time for another question to jump in. Episode number 3. And this one is about relationship repair. And very specifically, the question comes in, is it a fantasy to hope for relationship repair? So we're talking about fantasy, we're talking about hope, and how that all connects with relationship repair. And my simple answer is no. And let's explore, let's go deeper. What are we actually talking about here? And especially if you're listening and you don't quite know where the question is coming from, when we have a history of attachment injuries and some unintegrated attachment, as we know, trauma, there is an ability to distort reality and to live in denial and to live in a fantasy of what we hope the relationship would be, because we never quite are able to accept what it actually is. Or we have some history, very much being trained in our families, or you're through your childhood, through your family interactions, where relationships had a component of hurting you or not feeling safe and secure, not really feeling known. You were invisible. You're just not fully accepted for yourself. And in order to manage the crushing reality of that dynamic, and even if you're not even conscious of how painful and crushing it is, you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to operate in the family system, or if it's outside of family, it could be in your adult relationships, where the kind of mirroring that you're getting is very minimal. It's not being mirrored back to you who you are and your value and being appreciated and known, and someone really just showing up and engaging with you. The image that I get, that I can think of very specifically also comes from my childhood, is an idea of, like, if I was in my bedroom and someone would enter the bedroom. Very, very simple image. But imagine I'm playing with Legos, or I'm drawing some picture at the desk. And to have someone very purposefully enter the room and sit down on the edge of the bed, there's an immediacy and a presence. Hey, what are you doing? Or you have something that I need. I want to ask you a question. I want to spend this moment with you. It's a very simple gesture, but it really captures. We need that to happen on a consistent, regular basis. Definitely when you're a child and this is how relationships are built. And that we could step back, and from the point of view of me being the child, I observe other people's body language. I observe that they make the effort to come into my space of my room. They make an effort. They show up and say, hey, I have a question for you. I want to talk to you about this. Or, hey, the other day I read something that was funny. I wanted to share how humorous it was. So this sounds, like a no-brainer, but imagine if you're in a family system where that just doesn't happen. That the family members, they walk by your room, or they might, enter to complete a task, like they're dropping something off. But there's not a lot of engagement of really checking in with you. And so you are able to be in relationship in this kind of an example where there's not a lot of engagement happening. And if we really let that in, and if we are of a certain age and a consciousness and evolved to a place where we can step back and take inventory, we would conclude, most of us have an awareness, we conclude by saying, well, this is not ideal. This is actually hurtful. And I'm looking around, I'm observing my family members, and people are not actually relating to me. Now, because we cannot let this in consciously, it's if you have your 7-year-old mind, or your 9-year-old mind, or your 15-year-old mind, is just a bit too scary and overwhelming with regards to survival, to let in the reality that there's very little emotional nourishment and emotional connection actually happening. And if someone would walk in the example of the bedroom, that's an invitation. There's a reaching out. Just through the body language, they're reaching out saying, hey, I want to connect with you. And if you notice that you're in a system that perhaps that happens very minimally, it begins to send you the message that you're not worth connecting with. And you could imagine how that impacts your sense of worth and your self-esteem, and you can even trigger shame. There must be something wrong with me. So, as I've already said, we don't usually let in the reality of the pain of this, of how hurtful this can be. And we don't really have too many options. You don't really know how to solve it or make it different. Some people, maybe even subconsciously, unconsciously, they act out. They try to, create waves or, stir up drama to get attention. There are some people, and maybe you're one of these as a child, who you were very direct and you were able to identify, hey, something is off here. I'm sad. I'm really feeling sad that, we're not connecting. And you might not have said it in those actual words, but you're saying it in the words of a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old or whatever age it is. And chances are many times the parent can't even hear that, or the other family member cannot hear the request. And again, translate it to the imagery. The request is, come on, walk into my room, sit on the bed, ask me what I'm doing, engage with what I'm doing. Offer your own invitation to engage with something that you bring with. And then we're off. Then we're in relationship. There's this exchange. There's an initiation, a reaching for the other person, energetically, emotionally, through body language, through smiling, through touch. Hey, I'm here. I'm showing up. I want to connect with you. And then there's the reaching back. It's the person you're reaching for acknowledges it, can receive it, and they respond. Hey, good to see you. Oh, that's interesting. That's cool. Oh, I want to talk about that too. Or, oh yeah, thanks for asking about the picture I'm drawing. Yeah, this means this means that, whatever it is, and then you're in it. Then you're explaining it. Now, if you don't have this, and it happens very minimally, and you can't let in the crushing truth of how painful this would be, then oftentimes we have a fantasy. We need to override the reality with a fantasy. And this is the beginning of being trained to distort reality, to not let in the fullness of the truth that these people aren't really engaging with me, and it's actually creating a disconnect, and it's actually painful and hurtful, and my emotional attachment needs are not being met, but I don't have the language to, or even the insight to make sense of this. Some of us, we just normalize it. And one function to normalize it is to assume and imagine that our relationships with the people in our family, that they're stronger than they actually are, that the bonds of connection are stronger than they actually are. And this is what it would mean then to create a fantasy relationship. So that is all the setup. That's the preface to this question. Is it fantasy to hope for relationship repair? It depends on your relationship to fantasy. It doesn't mean that hope, to have hope and to wish something for the future outcome. Hope is neutral. It's okay to have hope. It's okay to have a thought about hope. And there is a function of hope when it is grounded in its wisdom aspect. I really like this idea that everything has a wisdom aspect and a neurotic aspect, or we could say everything has a wisdom aspect or a confused expression. It comes out, it has a different intention driving it beyond the good humanness of the wisdom in which it was intended. So at face value, it's okay that you have a thought of hope. I mean, you're a human being. Of course, we hope that we get a vacation. We hope that we have good health. We hope that we're able to connect with loved ones and really spend quality time together. We hope for a really good spaghetti dinner. Whatever it is, inherently there's nothing wrong with hope. But when you have an attachment injury, an unintegrated attachment trauma, hope can be actually a false hope that is fantasy distorted thinking. It's fantasy distorted thinking masquerading as hope. We are so easily distracted and think, well, hope is good. Why wouldn't you want hope? And again, back to the question, is it fantasy to hope for relationship repair? Relationship repair is possible, but we also have to be honest with ourselves that sometimes it doesn't work out. And many people use both hope and relationship repair as a distraction from being honest with themselves, that the relationship isn't really working and there isn't an ability to learn some new skills, and we have to accept the option that this is time to end and we're moving on, and we can't stay in a relationship that is going to require that we stay in distorted thinking. We must stay in fantasy thinking of distorting reality. So is it a fantasy for hope, to hope for relationship repair? No, not at all. It sounds like that would be a very healthy thing to do. But we're looking at the amount, where we create the distortion. And we're looking at how much weight, if you put an imbalanced amount of weight and an emphasis on the hope itself to the point where you're willing to overlook and override and deny the evidence, the data, the history of what you already know has happened. The best determining factor of the, possibility for relationship repair is done by being a detective and a scientist, and you just look at the data and you draw a conclusion. Over the last 6 months, have both people evidenced the skill level, the insight, the commitment, the sincerity, and offered some generosity, some accommodation, some sincere investment in creating relationship repair? If the answer is no, well, then that's your answer. then that skill and engaging in relationship repair, most probably from a logical perspective, is not happening. And it doesn't matter if you hope that it would. You just look at the data. You just look at the behaviors and you look at the interactions. So for many people who, when they think of relationship repair, a component or aspect of that is to go to couples counseling. And there's this idea like, well, once we're in couples counseling, life will be so totally different. And we're going to learn such new skills that our relationship will be totally different. What I like to talk to with new prospective clients who are a couple coming in for couples counseling is, well, what kind of relationship repair are you already engaged in now? And that also includes what kind of personal healing work from a self-directed perspective of taking care of processing your own feelings, being contemplative, being honest with yourself of where you need to grow and mature. Like, did you already do that yesterday? Did you already do that last week? And for the clients who say, oh no, we haven't even started, we don't even engage in that, I say, well, chances are that you think that there's going to be some kind of like profound lifestyle change where you're afforded some great new insight because you have denied and ignored and not pursued taking care of the relationship up to this point, not pursued taking care of yourself and growing and maturing and how you're in relationship. An easy question is, well, what book are you reading about relationships? What was the last kind of online training you did, or what kind of video did you look at to continue to grow and learn? And in a couple scenario where we're looking at relationship repair, both people have to be within a similar range of frequency of focus and commitment. So if you have one person who's extremely committed and doing all this work, but we're trying to get the other person on board because the simplest way to say it, and forgive me for saying it like this, is that, that one person's lazy, and my example is, potentially if both people are lazy, then yeah, it is fantasy to think about relationship repair because you're just getting off on the hope. You're not like keeping it grounded in the reality of, well, what are you doing already? If you want to repair it, what are you doing today that's already going to allow you to take one step closer to achieving some goal, a very specific concrete goal around relationship repair? So what we're trying to look at and discern, and we're looking at the weight that we are placing on the hope. And in this sense, what we're comparing it against is the real world skill, the real world commitment, the real world energy investment of, well, what are you actually doing that is on board or in alignment with relationship repair? And if your answer is, well, not much, I'm just waiting around hoping, well, to me, that says, well, then that's using hope as a kind of fantasy because you're ignoring the data that says neither you or your partner are actually like invested. Now, it's possible if you're listening to this, or I could just hear someone saying, what if you don't know how to begin? And so you haven't done anything because you're feeling paralyzed, you're feeling stuck, you really have that gridlock feeling, and you don't know where to begin. That is a really challenging question and really legitimate because many of us are in that place or have been in that place. And this is which I would say, well, we can't have black and white thinking. It's not either or. It's not that you're so completely stuck and paralyzed and can't move that you're unable, to go to the bookstore and browse, to find a book that resonates with you, or you're unable to read some blog post online that really, speaks to you and is going to spark some insight. Now, I understand that when we get in this place of gridlock in our relationship is really crashing and burning, that we have been in this push-pull dance for so long that many of us just feel shut down and paralyzed. So what we're looking for are what perhaps would be called islands of clarity, or these breaks. We're looking for a break. So we might say that, sure, your overall experience is one of being shut down. What I invite you to think about, and what I want to challenge you, is that it will not be 100% of the time. The nature of mind. The reason why I can say this is that mind, the product, the experience of observing our mind, it is always going and changing and shifting and opening and, obsessing about this and then shifting and coming into this focus and getting confused. And so we're going from confusion to clarity, confusion to clarity, confusion of clarity. And we can say that about, a range of states of mind, such as we feel stuck, we're unstuck. We're stuck and we're unstuck. And we're looking at the gap. We're looking at the transition between stuck and unstuck. And chances are, and I'm just, making this up. I don't totally know your life, but let's say, you perceive that 95% of the time, or, 90% of the time, that you're really in a state of feeling paralyzed and stuck, and you don't even know how to go to the bookstore and buy a book. You don't even know how to pick up the phone, and research, how to see a therapist, or whatever action step it would be. And you just feel so like, I don't even know where to begin. Chances are, because of the nature of mind, and this is what I want to point out, is if you really slow down and start observing, there are going to be breaks in stuckness. There will be breaks in the intensity of feeling the impossibility and the inability to take action. This is about agency. You don't have agency to take action. So you're disconnected from the internal mechanism that would allow you to have agency and direction. Say, hey, you know what? I can do something about this. I'm going to go out into the world and do something. And you can't. You're noticing you can't. But the challenge here, and the invitation, is I pretty much can guarantee there will be a break in the intensity and the impossibleness of the stuckness. Now, here's the thing. This break might only last for 10 seconds. This break might only last for half a day, for an afternoon. And by the time you drive home and you pull up into your driveway, you're crushed. You're feeling the heavy weight that descends upon you, the depression, the melancholy, the impossibleness, like putting on a heavy lead jacket. And the moment you arrive home and enter into, assuming you and your partner, you and your husband or wife, you live together, and you walk right into the familiar old routine of the impossibleness of non-relating and feeling stuck, and you don't know if you can have relationship repair. My point is that this will shift and change, and we're looking at expanding our ability initially to notice when we are not weighted down by the heavy coat of lead of impossibleness. But we actually could say, hey, you know what? This afternoon, for about 2.5 hours, I did slightly feel just a little bit of freedom, and I felt a little levity, and I was able to exhale. Now, this is good news, because that's what we're using. That is the evidence. That is the data where we say, see, you're not stuck all the time. You tell yourself the story, and the majority of the time you feel that you potentially even in a dissociated state of just perpetually looping in this stuckness. But your job is to notice these breaks from the intensity of the imploding feeling of having no option, no agency, and cannot make a choice, to when there's slight possibility of freshness and openness. And that's when we try to note it. And I have 2 years with clients in the past where I say, write it down in your phone. When you notice a shift in your state of mind that moves you a bit away from the predominant stuck feeling, go ahead and record it and write a note to yourself. On this day, at this time, I was in this place and I happened to notice that I had a little bit of inspiration and possibility that I am going to move forward in relationship. And I'm going to move forward with repair. And I'm going to move forward with coming up with some kind of concrete plan that I can present to myself to review and then ultimately also share with my partner and see how my partner is on board or not on board. And then you're going to notice after you make this note that after a certain period of time, it's all going to get thrown out the window and you're going to come back into feeling stuck again. So we're noticing this back and forth experience. It's not like we just cross a threshold or we flip a light switch and we say, hey, look, I'm no longer stuck. We don't just flip the light switch and say, hey, look, relationship repair is just, we're on, it's happening. Now we're repairing. It's more going to be we enter it, we attempt to move forward, to let in possibility, and then we're going to recoil and retreat and shut down and notice how we're back in the old habituated pattern. When we're undoing these old habituated patterns, that is the place where we really have a lot of gentleness towards ourselves. And I call the Britney Spears School of Therapeutic Intervention. Oops, I did it again. Oops, I'm stuck again. Oops, I'm using hope to distort reality. Oops, I've activated my fantasy to the point where I want to employ a false hope about what is possible. So I'm assuming everything here, we're in episode number 3 of this podcast of Is It a Fantasy to Hope for Relationship Repair? I'm assuming that a number of these points that I have created here are playing into trying to discern, well, is relationship repair possible, or just deluding myself with some kind of false hope? The last thing that I want to say, I want to bring it full circle and repeat or check back in with that example of being a child in the bedroom and someone enters the room. And I'm going to repeat and say the same thing, that it's really a simple, delicate, beautiful, almost effortless moment that all it takes for relationship connection and attunement and for there to be an activation of exchange of emotionally connecting with someone, it really just takes the invitation of reaching forward, of verbal or nonverbal, to say directly or not, hey, I want to connect with you. I'm here to place because I'm curious to know what you're doing and who you are. And I just want to check in, like, how are you? And you might not say those words directly. You might say, hey, do you want to have pizza tonight? Or I was thinking that we might, drive to our favorite pizza place. Are you looking forward? That in and of itself, it's that kind of engagement. So if you want to see if your sense of hope for relationship repair is a fantasy or not, observe the ability and the frequency of both you and your partner reaching towards each other in these kind of invitations, and then needing to observe the ability to respond back. It's always about their both. There's the initiating of the reaching for, there's the acknowledgement of the invitation, and then there's the reaching back as a response. And when this happens, that is the synergy of relationship. That is what makes it feel alive and dynamic. And that's what we would call, that's emotional attunement. We feel resonant with each other. It's like dancing. If you see two people dancing, the moment that they're both on rhythm, the moment that they're both moving effortlessly together at the same time, they are attuned. Their bodies are attuned to the movement and to each other, to their breathing, to the music, and then it looks like the dance. And that's what we're looking for with relationship. So if you want to know if your sense of hope for relationship repair has any validity, make an inventory of the number of times that you notice that there is a reaching, an equal invitation. Both people need to do this, but then also the ability to acknowledge that we're doing it and that the person's reaching back, and or that you reach back, that you're not shut down and that you're not holding out in some kind of guardedness, where you're ignoring invitations that are being offered to you as well. And sometimes the invitation that, we'll turn down an invitation because it's not the one we want. And so then we say, well, see that my partner's not reaching out. Well, in fact, your partner is reaching out for you, just not in the way that you want. And you still have to then be intelligent or discerning and say, well, maybe that's not the relationship for you because you don't, but that doesn't mean that your partner's not actually engaging, just not engaging in the way that you prefer or want. And that's legitimate. And if you override that or ignore that truth and then try to, hope for something different, well, that's how you might be engaging in fantasy and trying to imagine a relationship that doesn't exist because you're different kind of, that's not what you're creating. You have to come back to, well, what's the real data here? Just observe the interaction. That's it. That's the relationship that you have. And even if you pursue relationship repair, even if you pursue couples counseling and doing all these workshops and books and growing and maturing, it doesn't mean that you're going to, dramatically be, completely different people. You're going to be transformed, like you're amazingly different people with this profoundly new set of skills. It's, you can rely on the skill set that you have is very much going to be a big part of the continued skill set of how you're going to create relationships. And usually change in this area and specifically changing, inviting more secure attachment and being more sensitized and alerted to these very almost fragile, sometimes subtle interactions of emotional attunement and relational attunement. That's a skill. And it is something that takes a lot of strengthening that skill. And usually it really happens over a long period of time, not after 3 months of therapy, not after, reading 2 books and all of a sudden we're different. So be honest with yourself. When is hope at face value the wisdom aspect of hope? And when are you confusing yourself and distorting it so that it upholds your idea of a fantasy about what is really possible in reality? I hope that this was helpful. You have been listening to Relationships Q&A with Alan Robarge, where we talk about relationships because emotional connections matter. All questions come from members of the Improve Your Relationships community. To learn more about membership, go to alanrobarge.com/community. Thank you for listening.